Hello and welcome to John and James Live. My name's John Hastings and I have my co-host here, Mr.
James CeeLo.
James CeeLo. How are you, everybody? Hope you're well. If you're on the live now, just give us a hello in the comment section just to know that you're there. And we're going to be discussing screen time, corporate greed, personal responsibility. James, we had a bit of a viral post, didn't we, go out on Sunday, which is hit, what was it, 3,000?
Phenomenal.
3,100 reactions, 1,200 comments. Yeah,
How many
really
impressions?
off, isn't it?
I
think we're looking at around about 250,000 on impressions wise. So I think about 200,000 people have seen that post. So sometimes you hit them. Recently, we've had a little bit of a run, haven't we? So it's been full on. We've got John West.
John West. Hello, John.
Portland. I'm guessing that's Portland, Oregon, isn't it?
Yep.
I think it is.
OR is Oregon.
Roderick Lambert. How are you, sir?
Hello.
Hope you're well. Say where you're from as well. That would be pretty good to know.
Ben's in Istanbul.
Afternoon, gents. On my screen in Istanbul Airport. Hey, Ben. Ben's off to Yekaterinburg in Russia, actually.
Oh, easy interesting for you to say, mate.
Interesting trip. It's a long story. So we're going to be talking about this article, James, and because you've got such a beautiful voice, I would say maybe you should just read it out to just set the tone of what this talk's going to be about. And we're going to hit this talk from a few different angles. No, we're going to try to be objective about it, try and see where we are now, establish the problem, and then we're going to go and say, okay, where can the future go? Where are we going to hit with this? Because it's a big topic, and I will reveal my screen time, and it's absolutely awful.
Horrendous.
Really bad. Simon Powell, how are you, sir? Hope you're well. We've
got Adam, David, David Rich.
We have Martin Gillespie. How are you?
G'day from glorious Glasgow.
Glasgow. That was going to be Australia there with the old g'day. So, James.
Curveball. Okay, so I'm going to read this through quite quickly because we don't want to labour the point. But basically, the gist of the post was, is your child's brain being hijacked? Since 2007, something has been quietly dismantling childhood. It's changing the way your child thinks, plays, and interacts with the world. It connects them, yet isolates them, entertains them, yet distracts them, informs them, yet manipulates them. The playgrounds are empty, the dinner table is silent, the sparkle in their eyes dimming. Childhood, once defined by scraped knees and real-world adventure, has been traded for endless scrolling and dopamine loops engineered by billion-dollar corporations. Once, kids knocked on doors to play outside. I certainly did. Now they sit alone, mesmerized by glowing screens. Their developing brains rewired for instant gratification and infinite distraction. It's an experiment on your child's mind. In The Social Dilemma, former tech executives admit the truth. Your child is the product. Their attention, their emotions, their very their psychology monetized, manipulated, and controlled. Tristan Harris, a former Google ethicist, revealed that social media algorithms are deliberately designed to be addictive, exploiting the brain's reward system in ways eerily similar to gambling. And it's working. The average child now spends 7 to 12 hours per day staring at a screen. Childhood depression anxiety rates have skyrocketed by 70% since smartphones became widespread. Self-harm among teenage girls has tripled in the last decade. Attention spans have plummeted, with researchers warning of long-term cognitive damage. Every ding, every vibration, every notification, another pull on their fragile developing minds. And while you might think you're in control, the truth is they aren't just holding their phones are holding them. It's a digital drug and it's rewiring childhood. Dr. Gabor Mate defines addiction as a disconnection from self, short-term pleasure with long-term negative consequences. Isn't that exactly what's happening to your child? They crave the hit of likes, the next notification, the dopamine rush of another YouTube video, and yet they feel more alone than ever. Studies show that kids today are less happy, less independent, and more anxious than any previous generation. Eye contact is fading. Real-world problem-solving skills are declining. Deep thinking is being replaced with shallow, impulsive reactions. Neuroscientists warn that excessive screen time during childhood is altering brain structure, and it's reducing the development of key areas responsible for focus, empathy, and critical thinking. The childhood you wanted for them is slipping away. This isn't just a trend, it's a crisis. George Orwell's 1984 warned us of a world where people are watched, controlled, and manipulated. But what if the reality is worse? What if your child's every move, thought, and emotion is being shaped by an algorithm designed not for their well-being, but for profit? Have we already handed over our children to corporate money machines? Maybe it's too late.
There we go. Thanks for that, James. It's been quite a weird 20 odd years, isn't it? Even it was 2007 when the iPhone came out. Really only social media kicked off sort of 2007 onwards, didn't it? After the iPhone and the apps came through. So it's all relatively new. Even the internet's relatively new, isn't it? But because it's so ingrained into our world now, we just take it for granted. It's like we can't imagine life without it. And we're at that age group where we do remember, you know, you're 52, I'm 42 nearly. So we are at that age group where we didn't grow up with, you know, internet and phones. Yeah. So we've really just entered that period of time. So what did you think about the article, James? How did you feel about it? You've got 3 children yourself. I've got you know, late teenage children as well. So what was your first thoughts on the article?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely thought-provoking. I mean, it's written in a way to kind of elicit that emotional response for sure. And, you know, a lot of what was in there, it's startling, the statistics. I mean, we kind of know some of this already, but I don't know that we are aware of quite how deep it goes and the impact that it has. I mean, again, as a parent, I've talked about it in videos and bits and pieces and said that at the end of the day, we're all in the situation where we feel guilt generally anyway, but around screen time, there's huge amounts of guilt and angst and how long kids spend on there, and we're not interacting with them. And do we use them as a way in which we can get a bit of respite, you know, for ourselves to go, great, you know, they're on a tablet, I can have 10 minutes to myself or go and do something that I need to do. It's going to keep them occupied. But then that becomes a tool, and maybe it's over a period of time that you then you become desensitized to it, that you suddenly realize, oh shit, they've been on it for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And over time, it just becomes, as you said, normalized, that we're not actually considering what the impacts are. It's kind of just a thing that is now integrated into all of our lives, and where we generationally are thinking this is really, really bad. In conversations with my kids, they're kind of like, well, Dad, we know how to regulate our time on it. We know, and all my children are now adults, so their sensibilities and their rational behavior around it is different to when they were really small. They didn't have as much as kids have now in terms of exposure, but it's just really interesting, the generational differences, certainly, as you said, from our generation and our attitudes, that we probably have more fear around it and more angst than kids will. Kids will just say, well, we've grown up with it. It's part of our DNA. We know how to deal with it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But from generation to generation, the anxiety is much higher because it's not something that we've grown up with. So we're looking at it from our perspective, from our childhoods, where everything seemingly was much simpler. But then the generation back, so our parents would have seen our behaviors as triggering and worrisome. And that's just how it goes. It goes from generation to generation to generation.
Yeah, because we had the TV, didn't we? And that was very persuasive. Simon Powell says it's all driven by something called persuasive design. Yeah, we're gonna ask more questions about that, Simon. Actually, the Social Dilemma was a very interesting documentary that we mentioned in the article there. Roderick saying that Adam McMillan, MBE, the question I have is what came first, ADHD or EMF smog? There's definitely some literature out there connecting different things like that, isn't there, at the moment? So we need to, we'll address those. But in terms of my overview, if anybody's watched a documentary called Century of the Self, then it gives you a whole 100 years of, the onset of consumerism, starting with people like Edward Bernays, who was very influential in using Freudian psychological techniques to control the masses. So in Walter Lippmann's book in 1922, the masses were called the bewildered herd, and they were pretty much directing the masses from the elites, because even there's a lot of people that couldn't vote. In terms of, it was more landed gentry that could vote. Most men couldn't before that, and obviously women couldn't either, and different racial groups couldn't as well. But it seems as though we've gone from the bartering system to the Industrial Revolution, then into this capitalist system, which is the income for labor system. Even our education system is built upon this way of living, of getting people to work in factories. But after World War II, we was just producing so much abundance in terms of our technical capabilities that Edward Bernays saw this, a cousin of Freud, and he thought, we need to create this artificial demand, because people need to want things. There needs to be a desire to have things. So this was sort of post World War II. So then this whole movement of PR, marketing, came into effect, and it was more keeping up with the Joneses. So people needed to have what somebody had next door. It was all about getting the next upgraded car, or you needed the next kitchen appliance. So that's where it all really came from. And the best way to really do that and to make people want things is to really induce fear and insecurity, to make people feel like they're not enough, that they need something material to fill the void inside themselves, because we're comparing ourselves to others. We're a social species, and we feel like we're going to be left behind in that sense.
Yeah.
So that's really evolved, James, over the last, say, 50 to 70 years, through different stages of capitalism, pretty much tied to property as well. So if we see property prices back 70 years ago in comparison to wages, then it's a huge difference to where it is now. So I think all that tech's done is amplified what was already there. So we've now got something that's in your pocket that you can pick up, and it's a 24/7 TV, which can be more persuasive than potentially just you turning on the TV in the evening like it used to be with an advert. So it's slowly become this capitalist game. We sort of know there's two prongs to this. We've got our internal world, which is personal responsibility. What can we do on a personal level to improve our situation in our little world, whether that's discipline, being organized, that type of thing. And then you've got the external systemic environment. So I see it as sort of sitting in like an ice box. You can put the jackets on, you can put the woolly hat on, you can do star jumps, you can keep warm, but you're still in an ice box. The environment's having an impact on you. So you have to keep the discipline of doing that. If you step out of the ice box, then something can massively change. So that's in simple terms where I see, I wouldn't say simple terms, but if you understand the context of where it's come from, then you can start to see, okay, why has it become so pervasive. But in terms of that, James, where do you see, what's the positive? We'll take some questions here quickly.
So let's go, Simon.
Back to Simon. We'll go Simon. We got, people need to be comfortable with having bored kids. Being bored is a good thing. As a kid, I used to just stare out the window sometimes, and that was just fine. I completely agree. I think it's where creativity lies, in that boredom, isn't it? We're moving from either creation or consumption. We're definitely more in the consumption world. Even online, 99% of people are consumers, and the 1% are the ones who are creating. So how can you create that for your children? This one for you, James. Elisa, how are you? Hopefully I pronounced that okay. When I was a kid, I spent all my time playing outdoors in nature, construction sites. Yes, even this. I loved fishing, going to craft clubs. A lot depends on the parents now. When my son was 5 years old, his school friend got a PS for Christmas. I was kind of shocked. It's easy to make this change. Parents have to be strict and remove TV sets from all rooms. Buy books instead. Let kids be bored. Yeah, I get that. That's what we're talking about, James, in terms of controlling your environment in this system.
No, I agree. I agree. And look, and I think what we've got as a response from your post is pretty much from one spectrum to another. We've got a whole raft of, people's opinions of this sort of zero tolerance, that, no screens or no phones until they leave school. And another one was like, well, I want to give them autonomy. They have to be able to make their own decisions. If we're policing everything, does that then take agency away from them, that they've got no decision making? They don't develop that ability in order to know what's good for them or what isn't good for them. And at what age does that start to sort of kick in? So going back to that point about, removing them, your children are going out into the world where other kids have got these devices.
That's the difficult part, isn't it?
So in terms of our sense of self and belonging, if you don't know what a phone is, or you don't know what an app is, or you haven't played a particular game, you're instantly ostracized from that group. Now, you could argue that your child, doesn't engage in that, and they can't be all things to everyone, but there's going to be a lot of these kids that have knowledge of these things. And that's a sense of commonality. That's their kind of community, that they're relating to each other in that way. Now, if you don't know anything about that particular subject, you don't feel like you can enter into that circle. So how do you then get that balance where there's a knowledge base there, but there's not the addictive quality of it, that they're not on it constantly? And therein lies this kind of middle ground, that they've got exposure and you're allowing them a level of exposure. It's a little bit like, dare I say it, the sort of, the French that have wine at the meal table, and they'll have wine for the kids. And the kids will be there and they'll have a little bit of watered down wine, and it becomes normalized.
There's no taboo, is there, to it?
Well, they would then argue as a society that when they then leave home, there's not this like, whoa, we've got it, because it was denied us as children. And there'd be a lot of research around that in terms of, the pros and the cons of that. So we're not going into that right now, but it's a level of that you get an exposure to it. And then you kind of become desensitized, that it's not like this huge thing. So you could then argue that if they'd never had it as kids, the same with sweets and things like that, it's exactly the same principle, that some parents do not allow their children to have sweets or chocolate. And they're then encouraging them to have.
Suppression can go the opposite direction, can't it, sometimes?
100%. So, you can take a view on both sides to sort of go to the extremes of saying absolute abstinence and then complete exposure, unchecked, unmonitored, just let them get on with it. So it's the sensible thing of how we come back to that center to say, what can they cope with? Us as parents, it's our job to try to figure out what is best for them in all areas, not just around
I think Roderick's right here as well, because he says kids are particularly exposed as their neurological circuits don't have myelin sheaths that we adults have.
It's developing mind.
These provide some protection. So that developing mind, isn't it? They say sort of give me the child till 7 and I'll give you the man. But it definitely is an issue, isn't it? Because with kids, if you're wiring them to, short attention spans and they're always having this consumption of things going into their brain, that's obviously going to have an impact. I see it with because I haven't got younger kids anymore, but I see it with my friends' younger kids. And as soon as he's on the YouTube, on the iPad, you can call his name and he's not there. Yeah. He's tunneled in. He's like 8 years old.
I just want to bring up John's comment there. So he's talking about sort of gambling psychology, addiction, and all those sort of things. So, addiction's another interesting one that, are you potentially open to addiction? Could we qualify and say that people have an addictive personality, to become addicted to drugs or alcohol or gaming, gambling, all that sort of thing? And clearly it's set down to a set of circumstances. I don't subscribe to necessarily that, you are born with an addictive personality, for example. That doesn't, maybe there is a genetic makeup that perhaps would make it easier for you to go down that route. I'm not qualified to say, but my personal belief system is it's more nature rather than nurture. It's the environment that you're in. So we can kind of play it and say, look, this is kind of going down the lines of being addicted to gambling and those kind of elements, and that can kind of take the rhetoric in quite a possibly an overly emotional way, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
And we can see it really. It's about like I just described at the beginning in terms of the capitalist nature of business. The idea is to make profit. That is the sole goal of companies, and there in this system there can be inverse incentive structures. So let's say you're a personal trainer and you're working with people that are overweight. In reality, if everybody was healthy, you potentially wouldn't have a job. So you need people to be overweight for the business to work. So sometimes it's about symptoms management in this arena. And when it comes to screen time, we obviously know that it's time on screen, because it makes the more you're on screen, the more advertising revenue these platforms and companies have. If you're a gaming company, you want, there's in-app purchases, they call it, James, now, I think. Yep. I think you need to, I think a lot of parents have been stung with those. They don't realize what it is. And all of a sudden the kids, we talked about it, doesn't he? Like buying skins for
in
computer game.
Like that.
And you said yesterday, James, now you can buy land and things on these computer games. So it is all a commercial entity to get you billions of spent, the best psychologists in the world, to figure out how to get into your brain. So an analogy that I thought about this morning, James, was sort of when it comes to the personal responsibility side and environment, how I see it is this. So just hear me out, people. So let's say relationships are tough.
Is this going to be plumbing related again, or is this is something different?
No, this is relationships related, this one. So we all know relationships are one of the hardest things in the world. Hopefully you've got a lovely partner and all of that type of stuff. But let's say you're having trouble in your relationship, you have your ups and downs. You walk outside of your house, and what you have is 100 people that have been lined up and primed that are exactly your match in terms of your interest, your attractiveness, and your looks, who will proposition you every time you walk out the door. I would call that the environment. Now, what you've got to do is either put your helmet on, put your sunglasses on, put your earbuds in, do whatever you can to navigate that situation. So that is what I would say is personal responsibility. But the environment is not necessarily conducive to you staying on track, because if you didn't have that protection and you have an argument at home, how long can you resist the environment when you step out the door and you're in the Matrix? They call it the lady in the red dress comes along, and you'll be in a position when you're at your weakest and she's coming along, she's talking about your interests, she compliments you, she knows how you think. They've got all the algorithms and the data. So this is the analogy of how this is working, whether it's food, you know, whether it's online algorithms like dishing you up more of what they think you enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, I probably add another level to it. You know, that analogy that you used is kind of being hypnotized and then put out in the street.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you're doing it subliminally. You're not, there's not even a conscious sort of process of going, well, I'm going to leave the house. You know, you have to sort of think actually some
subconscious
kind of intentionality to go, well, I'm going to leave the house.
Yeah.
But if somebody has kind of, you know, put you into that state, I think that, you know, that may have a different kind of perspective on it. So what have we got here?
User,
Schools need to radically rethink the whole tech paradigm as well as parents. It's appalling. The facts that the Silicon Valley gurus have always known it's extremely damaging to children. Absolutely. Not to mention the rest of the population. Some facts. So employees of Silicon Valley giants send their children to a 9-classroom school without any computer technologies. Employees of Silicon Valley giants send their children to schools without computer technologies. They send their children.
I've heard this with Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. They didn't give their, you know, kids iPads and stuff because they know what it is. And that's what we're talking about, the pervasiveness of this capitalist profit system. It's where do you draw the line, you know, because it is, if we say everything is about profit, when do you start to think about what it means for humanity or children?
At what point do we get so far down the line that actually, you know, is this a bargain for sale that it will take a hell of a long time for it to turn around in the opposite direction? And at what point do we say we've done too much damage? It's, you know,
it's too far. Then we're going to have to re-question the whole premise of capitalism and how we work, isn't it? If we want to solve problems, then maybe we're going to have to think completely differently. So Ben says, for me, phones, internet, socials are just a tool. They're not good or bad. They just are. The foundation that we use them from will determine our experience. If we're using them from a connected state, it will amplify that 1,000 times. If we're using them from a disconnected state, it will simply amplify the situation. I agree with Ben, but what I think's happening, James, if it's like if you're an overweight child, sometimes you haven't got the consciousness to know about nutrition or healthy eating. Once you're in that primed in that state, I will call it priming children. Then once you become an adult, it's like 10 times harder to become disciplined. These things are viscerally, with the neuroplasticity, already wired into your brain. So how can you, it's not even happening on a conscious level. It's all subliminal.
So until it becomes
messaging.
Conscious, it's almost impossible to combat. So going back to your analogy about food, so again, speaking for myself personally, there's lots of different things that's going on in my head around eating, overeating, the type of food that I eat, whether it's nurturing me, whether it's damaging me. And depending on any given day of what mindset I'm in is to the quality of the food and the quantity that I eat. So we're very much governed by our emotions. So going back to what Ben was saying about the fact that a phone is just a tool, he's absolutely right. And we can think about it and sort of vilify it and look at it as this kind of monster in our pocket. But it's like, how do we deal with that knowing? So there's this kind of fine line between forgiving ourselves to know that there is an algorithm there that's vying for our attention, that is geared up to get our attention. And also knowing that we do have agency. But going back to the food side of things, it's like there has to be consequences. So I need to know in myself, if I overeat or I constantly eat bad food, that there's a likelihood that I'm going to suffer from coronary heart disease. And I'm going to feel pretty shitty about myself. There's the consequence. But that thing that enters my head before I put the food in my mouth needs to be there quite prominently to prevent me from doing that action. Now, the thing with using a phone or scrolling, whatever, there's not that level of outcome that it's going to be a bad thing for you. It's passive. So you're not getting the immediate insight into where this could take you until maybe an hour later, maybe it's half an hour later, maybe it's 10 minutes later that you suddenly realize and go, shit, what am I doing? Why am I on here? Why am I just, senselessly scrolling? So there's no immediate thing there that will say this is a bad thing for you to do, because it's distracting you from potentially the painful thoughts or the dark thoughts in your head that you should be addressing, as opposed to scrolling.
And we can say in that side, James, it could be a sedation tool. When life gets tough, you go on, you're switching off, you're going into a different world. But we've also got to acknowledge there's lots of positives. If it's just a tool, I really enjoy, I love the internet. I think it's a world of curiosity and knowledge.
Totally.
I like reading Wikipedia. I'm always on documentaries. I've just got a thirst for knowledge. And this, I just can't get enough. So hands up, my screen time is awful. We did it yesterday, James.
We're going to do the big reveal.
Should we do the big reveal? So if you're out, let's take a couple of more questions first, and then we'll do the big reveal on screen time. So
let's delay that gratification.
We're building it up. We're building it up, and I want everybody out there to put their screen time as well. So you give us your screen time, guys. So intermittent fasting is a protocol which helps with nutritional and metabolic well-being. So as adults, we adopt this protocol of fasting times from technology as an example to loved ones and kids. For example, fasting from 6 p.m. in the evening to 6 p.m. I think maybe this is an internal conversation. Is it about fasting? You're very much behind fasting, aren't you, James?
Martin, you're a man after my own heart, for sure. But again, it's a kind of a discipline. So, but I'll go back to my previous point that if it's something that you believe in that's actually good for you, then you're going to do it. So me personally, I subscribe to it. I've read the research. I've done it personally. I know the physiological effects that it has on me. It's a positive outcome. Now, all the time you're in a situation where you feel like this is punishment, very unlikely you're going to engage with it and do it on a regular basis. So the same thing goes for screen time, that if you feel like you are punishing yourself or this is some kind of punitive thing, you're going to push back against it. So where's the reward? Where's the reward that overrides that dopamine hit that you get from being online? That's the question.
I agree. And if you're an alcoholic and you're living in a pub, it's quite hard, isn't it? And maybe we are in that world where, we get up, we go to work, we're probably in front of a screen all day, depending if you've got a manual labor job. Then you come home, you maybe switch the TV on, you're on your phone. We're always on our phones, and there is positive sides. FaceTime is amazing. The amount of knowledge you can withdraw from it. It can automate things, make life easier. So there are positives from it. And they said even with surgeons, there was talking about surgeons playing computer games, and the best surgeons in the world are the ones that went through this course of playing computer games, because they've got the dexterity in their fingers.
Hand-eye coordination.
And really, computer games is about high-level problem solving. So you can see some of the benefits from that. and they get a lot of love and reward from it. So maybe the gamification of education, I completely agree, revolutionizing education, because we are in that sort of industrial revolution age of still sitting in front of a classroom and being preached at and memorizing. I think that's going to have to evolve massively.
Agreed.
So we got Ben said, for me, our job as parents is to teach children how to be responsible so that when they're 18, they can survive in the material and energetic world. For me, the best form of leadership is demonstration. To teach them responsibility, we must show them, not tell them.
Okay.
I like that. Yeah, the responsibility side is great. On the flip side to responsibility, it definitely, there is context, isn't there, James, to any circumstance. Let's say one of your kids is really sick and you have to look after that kid, and then the other one is, you're trying to have to pacify the other one, and you give them the iPad, or you're short on money and you're having to do 3 jobs. So there's always, you've got to really try your best and show leadership, but I understand it can be ridiculously hard. Simon Powell, there will be court cases in the future. Just as the tobacco companies face, the technology companies have lied to us. Once it's proven the damage that has been done, then those companies will have to pay big to make it all go away. I understand, Simon,
it's
on
interesting,
that,
but it's so intangible.
What scale is that going to be on, James? Because this is probably the biggest experiment in human history in the last 20 years.
I mean, you can unequivocally prove that tobacco can give you, lung cancer. You can see over the years and years and years with autopsies and, people that have died from lung cancer. You can see the lung porridge that's there. The evidence is absolutely there. I think neurologically it might be slightly more nuanced and trickier to prove, but as time continues and as research gets better and these kind of things become more, I guess, easy to implicate, that will potentially, and I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of evidence coming out in the near future around it.
In terms of the whole holistic view, in my opinion, from the research, I think it's to do with, our social system and this stage of our evolution in this capitalist social system. So the widening of house prices to wage, or the disparity between the two, puts such now a strain on the family unit. So now we're having, both parents potentially having to work. The man's becoming emasculated. He can't even look after his family anymore. Even the normal man is now interdependent. He's dependent on the system. He can't grow his own food. He's not hunting. He can't look after his family. He has to do a secondary role to gain access to the things that he needs. So he's a little bit like a slave to the system. He has to play the game constantly. And all that's doing is that fracturing of the family unit is causing more disconnection with children, more childhood trauma. And then all of that childhood trauma is causing more addiction, because it's trying to reconnect with the self and fill some type of void. So that's when we're getting things like ADHD, all of these. There's a lot of different theories. I'm not saying that's 100% the case, but there are a lot of theories around some of these things.
I mean, I think fundamentally, again, it goes back to that kind of addiction question that we were talking about, that some people are addicted to certain things and there's other people that aren't. So I think, at the end of the day, it's like
Ben's boarding.
What Ben was saying, safe journey, Ben. What Ben was saying about, the phone is just a tool. It is absolutely how we interact with it. And we've got to look at ourselves as individuals to make a judgment on why it is that we are using these devices in a particular way. And those are the hard questions, because that could be as I said, around anything in terms of alcohol addiction, drug addiction, porn addiction, you know, and the phones are there to enable that kind of access to that realm. But what are the reasons why?
And I think just awareness and being curious is a great position to start in. So you're not, you know, you're not always blaming yourself, because really it's a lot to do with the shame, the guilt, the fear, isn't it? The lower consciousness levels. You know, understanding your childhood trauma, understanding the systemic context of, you know, the life that your parents lived, their behaviors, why they may have treated you a certain way, maybe not taking everything so personally. And I know really bad things happen, like sexual abuse, and it can really spin you off in different directions and turn you to addictions, because you don't want to face those type of things. But there's some big questions there. So John West says these systems are also restructuring the brain. 100%. It's that neuroplasticity. That's why children are more susceptible. They're more in a dangerous position, I would say.
Yeah.
Which is probably worse for those that seem to be born with less inherent self-control. These are huge differences in my two boys. I think that fathers specifically need to step up and ensure that the boys get board time, especially outdoors, without tech, but with the resources to explore the individual interests alone. I think that's a great point, James, because we didn't touch on this yet, but environment's important as well. So I'm from a council estate in London. We had a tiny garden at the time. Very different maybe from yourself, James, if you're born more in the countryside. So your environment makes a difference as well. I haven't got any outdoor space where I live now in an apartment in London.
Yeah.
Many people don't. You know, you're not even allowed. I used to play out on the streets as a kid. There used to be a lot of us. Now there's more of a fear of letting out children because they're scared of them being kidnapped. Statistically, I'm not sure if it's any worse than it was before, but it's definitely, parents feel differently, don't they, James? What was life like for you living more in the countryside? Because that is more nature based, isn't it? Out in the elements.
Well, yeah, I've lived urban and I've lived rural, so it's not always been kind of like skipping through fields.
But you went from one mansion to the next, didn't you, James?
Yeah, pretty much, mate. Pretty much. I had a very a very privileged upbringing. But no, we started out with pretty much nothing. And then through divorce and change of circumstances, we then did have money. I mean, like, we had boats, we had cars, we had good holidays, we had lights that suddenly switch off. That's always handy, isn't it? Let me bring this one in. We'll turn this one on. And so, yeah, you know, it was always kind of out and about and playing and just having fun. You know, a mate of mine, we'd go out on bike rides, and there was like a local stables there with some girls that were there, and we just kind of rock up and, you know, have a bit of fun. And then we cycle off back home, have some sandwiches, go and run around some fields. And I didn't have a phone. You know, we had pay phones and things like that if we needed to get in contact with anybody, etc. So yeah, it was just
definitely more an outdoor lifestyle, James. I know a lot of people on here are saying that. For me, I was outside knocking on people's doors. I was even in London on the streets. I was outside all of the time. So boys will make mistakes and get in trouble. Boys have always competed, and there are risks for those that get ostracized. I think the real damage is to girls psychologically, as inclusion, exclusion can be more important to them. I think that's a great point, John. Girls and boys, the environment makes a huge difference, plus gender, because, you know, I've got daughters and I would treat them very differently to how I treat my boys. You sort of let your boys go off, don't you? Get hurt, do what they got to do, go crazy. But for the girls, you definitely want to protect them more. And then in this online world, they are really being targeted. So we did the article before about 80% of the consumerist market online is female. So they're being hammered in the targeting in terms of what you should look like, makeup, clothes, weight, body image. anorexia, obesity, and then you throw in things like pornography again, which is another thing, watch time, advertising. For young people, the pornography thing for boys is insane because you've got instant access to the most,
whatever you want,
porn, whatever, the most craziest porn in the world. And then
if they're not having those conversations with if they're not having those conversations with their parents, if their parents don't feel that they have the tools or the ability to be able to have that conversation with their kids, where are they going to get that knowledge from? Where are they going to get their cues from? They're going to get it from the internet or other kids that have watched it, and they'll have those conversations. So
Simon says books beat the internet hands down. Feed your knowledge with books. In terms of that, Simon, I've got a lot of books that I barely read. I love audio, visual. I really like summaries. I'm constantly downloading information, and the book, because of with books now as well, I would say that because they're out there to sell the book, and it's a thing where you got to look like it's worth the money. 80-90% of books is like filler, and it's like, oh man, just land the plane. I think there's
pros and cons. There's pros to having a book, having something tangible and in your hands, and something to kind of read. If it's fiction, it's non-fiction. But there's definitely massive.
I don't read fiction, which I probably should, because I feel like I should do.
You think it's a waste of time, don't you?
No, it's just because I'm come from a poor background, and it feels like it does feel like it's a waste of time. I feel like I need to improve myself to, make money, and I haven't got time to, read fairy tales.
You think it's frivolous? Do you think it's?
I feel like I haven't got time for fairy tales, and I get that it can have benefits with like your creativity, but I would probably rather write it myself. But some books, a lot of books now, you could probably read Think and Grow Rich, which is like 100 years old, and there will be thousands and thousands of new personal development books which are just offshoots of exactly the same thing. So a lot of books is basically choosing which ones are worth actually reading as well, whereas I feel like you can summarize information better online, whether you're using ChatGPT, Googling, or documentaries, or just speaking to people like professors, which is quite useful. I have to leave. It's great discussion. Okay, take care, Roderick. I'll read all of your comments after, Roderick, and then I will answer then, if that's okay on that. But in terms of, we have a new one on here, James. Solution to excessive addictive screen time: safeguard and parental control with screen limits, reward the discipline of following screen rule, open discussion. It will improve self-esteem slowly.
I totally agree with number 3. Have a conversation with your kids. I think just if they can understand your perspective, and the majority of things with our children comes from fear. We want to protect them. We want to keep them safe. But they don't see that as keeping them safe. They see that it's just punitive, and you're dictating to them. And because I've said so, I'm the adult, I've said it, and that's it. That's final. You come at it from that perspective, you're going to get massive pushback, and they're going to go in totally the opposite direction. So if we can have a conversation with them, depending on the age of the child, for sure. But I think if we can say to them how it, we're concerned, get their perspective, how it makes them feel, what are their worries about it? Are there any worries? How do they interact with it? What do they use it for? And if you've got a good relationship with your kids, you'll be able to have that conversation, that they can be honest with you.
Yeah.
And, they're not going to want to tell you what they think you want to hear. That you can actually say to them, look, guys, let's have a little sit down, and I understand why you use these tools, and I get it, but I would just like to get your perspective on it. How can we have that conversation open?
And you think the whole Pavlov Pavlov's dog experiment type of thing. Have you heard of that, James? Ringing the bell.
Ring the bell and salivate.
And then the dog salivates. So I think, when you train your kids like a dog, I will have to research that, but maybe there you can. Maybe you take them for a walk, you get a bell. And the kids will start salivating
but they're getting their cues. They're getting their cues from something. I mean, you were talking about in the article when your phone pings. So there you go. There's Pavlov's dogs right there, because it's I've got a notification. I'm going to pick my phone up. But even if you haven't got the ring on or the haptic feedback, you've put something out and you want to look and see what the response is. It's still getting you into that loop. But again, it's exploring the reasons why. It's sitting with why this is happening, why it makes you feel that
Simon
way.
said the books need to they are quality checked and other information isn't. I agree that is a problem. I
would argue that all books are quality checked. I think some, certainly ones that get self-published or, there's not
probably nowadays, in terms of you can just be a self-publisher. Plus,
I don't know that it guarantees it's absolutely 100%
it's
factual.
A little they can be subjective opinion. Yes, there are medical journals that are peer-reviewed 100%, which is more of
I take your point, Simon. I don't want to upset you.
But even those, I'm starting to, when there's any monetary gain behind any type of research, like the research is by big pharma or other things, it could be completely legit, but it sows the seed of doubt, doesn't it? When there's any other alternative ulterior motive to
you've then got the ability to go off and do research. You can go and look at other websites, other peer-reviewed research, and anything that's been done on a sort of a high level. You can then go away and start to do more in-depth research to actually get to what you can consider to be the truth.
Mick says here, it has never been easier to be a parent, but it's even harder if we do not take on the responsibility attached to it. To be honest, I love Mick, but I probably disagree with this one. I know the birth rate is down. The replacement birth rate is down at the moment. Because of the house price to wage disparity, most people are struggling on the wire a lot of the times. And juggling kids, people are having kids much later. They're having fewer kids. My granddad at the early 1900s and his family, he was one of 15. Wow. They were poor, broke. People can barely afford one kid at the moment. And there's all sorts of problems with men having lower testosterone now. IVFs and things are becoming more popular. People are unhealthier in terms of their physical status. So and then you've got all of the expectations of, you're seeing the highlight reel of everybody's world on the internet. So you're completely comparing yourself to everybody, whereas that wouldn't have been the case when you was a parent back in the 50s to 70s. It wouldn't have been as pervasive. So I would argue it's probably never been a harder time to be a parent. And if you go to nursery fees, that's like somebody's whole annual wage to put a kid into nursery if you go to school. It's just ridiculous.
And it's interesting when you overhear conversations as well. And again, they get reported in the media, and you've got to kind of fact check to see that it's true. But people overhearing conversations with kids, teenagers, young. Everybody's young, in my opinion now, but in their sort of early 20s, talking about not bringing children into this world.
I've heard it loads of times, yeah.
There's fear around bringing children into where we're at right now, but
it's hard enough to survive by yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, but again, it comes down to whether you are, seeing this as, you're coming at it from a negative perspective or a positive perspective. It's either that kind of abundance mindset or scarcity.
Yeah, mixing a balance of the old with the new allows us to see it from both sides, have dinner together and learn to truly listen to what they say. I totally agree with this, Mick.
Agreed.
I think you should have boundaries in your house. If you let things get out of control as a parent, you basically train bad behavior, I would say, James. If you've got kids on their phone at the dinner table, this should be a non-negotiable. There is no phones at the dinner table. You sit down together and eat. But nowadays, I think you have parents that are eating food on their lap whilst watching the TV. The kids are on their phone.
And again, another thing, sort of the onset of YouTube, it's like you don't consume TV like we consume TV. There wasn't sitting down and watching TV together. So now they're off watching YouTube on their iPads or whatever in their rooms on their own. We're not sitting together and watching TV like we used to.
Yeah, Mick reiterates what you just said, James, about people deciding that they don't want kids, and that's a sad reflection of the world we live in. And that is basically where we're at. We're in this highly commercialized world where we commodify everything. We even commodify human relationships, don't we, James? Whether you're going to your therapist or you're doing anything, everything's a monetary transaction, and you've got to figure out how you're going to make money all the time whilst your overheads are just astronomical. Hey Gemma, hope you're well. Good to see you. Family should be valued much more highly in the UK as it is in Denmark, Norway, France, where no one can work more than 35 hours per week, so you can spend time together as a family. I totally agree, Gemma, that I think family, motherhood, fatherhood should be the center
prioritized
of our lives. It shouldn't be GDP, economic growth. It should be some type of well-being scale for the society. Otherwise, what is the point? You know, it's the most important thing there is to have, James, in terms of those personal relationships. And maybe other countries, I've got family in France. They do work hard, but the kids still live at home and they're in their late 20s, 30s. Maybe that's a little bit more common. They have that in other cultures as well. It seems in the UK, specifically for white English culture, not so much as Indian or other cultures, that you see that the kids just disperse. The family seems to be migrating into all different directions, and it's just like mass disconnection, isn't it? Whereas other cultures, they basically live together, they work together. The brothers, one's a lawyer, one's a painter and decorator.
Well, it's a fascinating sort of concept, this term, empty nest syndrome, is that all of a sudden your kids are gone. You've been a parent for 20 odd years, and then all of a sudden the kids have gone, and you're kind of looking at each other, and if you're lucky, you still like each other and you want to spend time, and there's a new chapter to your life. So there is something to be said for that as well, in terms of things that you weren't able to do when you were a full-time parent, that now you're in a position, whether that's financially or you've got the time and the space to then go and sort of reconnect with each other. So that's a thing to consider as well.
Maybe it ties in as well with the actual trauma of survival of that specific generation, that the disconnection between the kids and the parents is then proliferating into their adulthood, and that is why they are more disconnected now. I see Gemma says, do you think the quality of life is better for the current generation than it was for when you both were young? I would say for myself, Gemma, I'm from a council estate in London. My mum was a cleaner, single parent. Father sort of left when I was 5. She could afford to take me on holiday every year. We went to Greece, the Caribbean. I never went without. I had a paper round. I earned like 80 quid a month working as a paper round. I felt rich. We lived in a council flat, which is now worth probably more than £500,000 in Clapham. So I would say, looking back at my mum's world, even if she was in a very difficult position back then, I earn way more than she earns now, but I would say my quality of life is much less. That same Caribbean holiday in the 90s would probably cost me about 15 grand to take my daughter and my kids away in the same, to the same thing. So I would say, we used to go out as well. My mummy was out with my stepdad Friday, Saturday, Sunday to like the labor clubs, social life, spending money. Man, I'm holding back on buying a coffee, which is £5, and I'm earning okay money. And it's because my overheads now are so high in terms of renting in London that I would say, Gemma, the quality of life has gone. I would say it's gone down. What about you, James?
So I think we would need to qualify what we mean by the quality of life. So if it is purely fiscal and what we can buy, then I would argue you're right. Economically, we're not in the same situation. Things haven't kept track. Property prices, if we talked about, and incomes hasn't risen accordingly. So there's definitely that. But I would then argue that look at the bigger picture thing in terms of healthcare, in terms of other elements. We've got, food, access, that I think possibly it can be argued that we are better off in that respect.
The chocolate bars are tiny, James. Have you seen how the size of the chocolate bars these days?
Yeah, well, we've
10 times the price, and they look like they're the size of your little finger. You're just like, what happened to the old school Snickers, big Snickers bar that you used to get, or Marathon?
Wagon wheels.
It was
Remember the size of wagon wheels are as big as your head.
I would say I don't know, James. But I would say
it's your quality of life based on the size of a Snickers bar, though, mate. Because if it is,
it was a marathon back then, James. Ian Bridge, how are you, sir? Family time is precious and needs encouraging. I couldn't agree more, sir. We need to get back to family, and maybe it's a connection with ourselves, and that's this is bigger problems that we got to solve, which is going to come forward, James, with AI, job displacement. I think these problems are just going to grow and grow and grow in that sense. Mick Webb, it's all so subjective to the environment you relate to. Happiness is not a constant; it is an individual ideal. Some from privilege are unhappy, and some from poorest are unhappy. Completely agree. Your consciousness can change your environment. It doesn't just mean your environment. I know plenty of people with loads of money who are miserable, and people who are not, who are relatively okay. So I completely agree with that as well. We've got Martin Gillespie, great discussion and shared insights. Keep up the awesome platform. Have to dash. Thank you all. Take care, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Take care, much appreciated, mate. Mick, should we really see money as a true measure of life, or have we been conditioned to believe what we have? No, I agree, Mick, on that side. It's just money. If you can pay your basics, rent, food, mortgage, and then you've got, they say whatever it is, £70,000 a year is something like the ideal. Anything above that, then your happiness, it's diminishing returns on happiness. But people are struggling, the majority of people, and the wealth inequality now is a struggle for younger generations. You're born after 1980 and you haven't jumped on the housing ladder, and you haven't got parents to potentially help you out.
Yeah,
man, it's a sticky wicket, isn't it, James? So I think screen addiction is part of it's a symptom of a bigger problem. And what are we going to do about the commercialization and the capitalist system about making profit? We know that they want you to be addicted, James. So unless we deal with that massive question, you're always going to be living in this environment.
Did you see that program with Martin Sheen where he bought £1 million worth of debt for £100,000? Did you see that? It's been reported in the news as well.
No.
So there's a kind of an insight into consumerism that, you know, people are getting into more and more debt to pay off existing debt. So what they can't do is go to the bank and negotiate. Banks have got a kind of almost a zero tolerance and will not engage in any kind of negotiation around your level of debt. And yet, you know, somebody's come in, as I said, and spent £100,000 to buy £1 million worth of debt and written it off. So
see you later, mate.
It's you know, it's systemic, isn't it? It's an attitude towards it.
Put it in the links, James. Any of the things that we talked about today, we'll put in the links below. But thank you everybody for joining this live. It's a very deep conversation, so we probably only just, you know, touched the surface of a huge systemic
apologies
issue.
If we didn't read out your comment. There were a lot of comments today. We will get better.
We will get better at doing it, but we're gonna be doing some giveaways, some PDFs that we've got to sort of disseminate some of these big picture ideas and thinking, and give people a bit of an awareness of exactly where we're at in the world and where we're potentially heading. And it's going to be a bit of a ride, James, I would say, especially with how fast tech's moving now. Things are going to change and you're going to have to adapt. You have to adapt your psychology. You're going to have to adapt to a very difficult environment. Otherwise,
100%.
You're just going to be dragged along, aren't you, by your coattails? So thank you, everybody, for joining this live. And we will see you Friday, I think, guys.
We will be Friday here, same time, 1 o'clock.
Alan Bray, great stuff. Many thanks. Thank you, Alan.
Great way
Thank
to
you
end.
to everybody
Thanks,
out there. Has anybody got any other questions? Last questions? And
final
we'll
offer.
give you the very best answers. Final offer on the last questions. If you've got any other questions, let us know. I don't think we have any more, James. No.
Gone.
We're all good. Everybody take care. Have a fantastic day. And we'll speak to you soon.
Love to all. Bye, bye, bye.